All right, Steve, I think you got called the LeBron
I
of,
know I feel bad. He's wearing the
right,
Celtics, and
right there,
I'm a huge
which
Celtics fan. I just
might be insulting. I don't know. Shouldn't be, I don't think.
I'll go with the Celtics reference then. I would say that you have to know the truth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hayes Davis, CEO of Gradient Works and author of the Uncharted Territory newsletter. And every so often, I like to take a break from long form written content. Everyone loves to read lots and lots of words, but sometimes people like sounds and pictures too. So I try to do something that at least resembles a podcast, and here we are. And so today I want to tackle something that I think is super critical for CROs, the right way to transition from one quarter to the next. You got to do it over and over and over again. And especially, I think it's especially sensitive in Q1 to Q2, right? So here to talk about that are two of my favorite CROs, Steve Travaglini and Ryan Burke. So guys, why don't you introduce yourselves? Maybe Steve, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'm Steve Travaglini. I'm the former CRO at Link Squares, where we scaled from 500K to over 50 million in ARR. Today, I am the CEO and founder of a company called Winrate, where we're using agentic AI workflows to help sales teams close more business.
yeah. And up until very recently, I was running sales and customer success and support for Zilla Security, a Series A funded cybersecurity startup that was just acquired last month by CyberArk. And so I joined the CyberArk team as running sales for Zilla's product.
Awesome. Well, so guys, the genesis of this conversation was I set out to write one of my long form text-based posts. And so I reached out to knowledgeable folks, really asking something that was going to lead to, what are 5 questions that CROs should be thinking about as they transition to Q2? And you all gave me such good stuff. I was like, I can paraphrase this and write it down, but that would be stupid. Let's get it directly from these guys. And so I really appreciate you jumping on here. So I want to kind of structure this based on what I heard as we were talking a little bit earlier, which is you know sales is fun because you run as hard as you can to the end of the quarter, and then the scoreboard resets and you have to do it again, right? And you just do that over and over again. But what it means is there's kind of a set of things you need to do every time you have one of those transitions. And I think roughly it sort of corresponds to, let's look back at the previous quarter, see what we can learn. Let's figure out how we adjust going into the next quarter. And let's figure out how we communicate that to everybody who's relevant, from reps all the way to the board, right? So kind of use that to structure the conversation. So let's kick it off with the look back. So Steve, maybe kick us off here. Like as you think about looking back at a quarter, as you get around this time, what are the things that you want to dive into and make sure you understand? So let's start there.
Yeah, so two things that I'm always focused on towards the close of a quarter and following the actual close of the quarter is the win-loss analysis, and looking at that quarter over quarter, but slicing that data a whole bunch of different ways. So I would love to look at opportunities through a whole bunch of different lenses. You look at your different segments that you might have, or even territories. You could look at verticals. But I also look at buying personas, titles of people that are buying. And, this is assuming you have instrumentation in place to track all of these things. There was a time we didn't, and then there was a time that we did, right? So eventually you start to, put some of these things in place, and then you could get a pretty good beat on what changed quarter over quarter. And I think that is critical for guiding the strategy and behavior of the next quarter. It also, gives you something to look at. Typically, something jumps off the page that helps to illustrate, hey, like this is actually a little bit different than the last quarter we experienced. One example there is, I remember Q4 of 2022. At Link Square is our top buying persona at a conversion rate level. So close one business with CFOs. If we look back, I think since, it was the back half of that year, July 2022 is when things started to get hard in tech, and like people say, ZERP kind of started to come to a screeching halt. But we were tracking very closely who was still buying at a high clip, and we found, even though we were selling legal software, the CFO was the buyer, right? And so we analyzed that, and then going into the next quarter, Silicon Valley Bank crashed, and quarter over quarter, there was a fairly huge change in behavior. So that quarter over quarter analysis is really important, and it helps make sure that you're always working the accounts that are or personas and such that are highest conversion. And then the second thing that I always look at is the stage to stage analysis of just like every step of the funnel. And this is, where the first is more macro, the win-loss analysis. This one's more about, what's happening within the actual sales process. And you can also compare this quarter over quarter. That's super useful. But for me, this is where I would look at the team on average, but I would also look at outlier performances from our best reps or our perennial, powerhouse President's Club folks, and I would look at how they were comparing to the average, and isolating different cohorts of sellers to figure out what's going on, and then double click in from there. But those are the two things that I would typically look at after a quarter and before a quarter.
Real quick before we switch over to Ryan, what's your look back for comparison there? Are you looking at like, let's say it's Q1 to Q2? Are you looking at Q4 versus Q1? Are you trying to do, quarter to quarter? Are you looking at like year-over-year comparisons to control for seasonality? How'd you tackle that?
I would look at it from every possible angle.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because I want to understand it better than anybody else. And, I want to understand, I want to have as much data available to me so that I can find the narrative and like, try and tease it out to, because it might not be so obvious as like quarter over quarter. And then there's things that you start to learn about your business, seasonality, things like that, where you have, different buying behavior and pipeline generation behaviors in different quarters. So I actually looked at Link Squares. We were on a normal fiscal, and Q1 and Q3 were what we called build quarters, and Q2 and Q4 were what we called closing quarters. And they're exactly how they sounded. We built a lot more pipeline, closed less business in Q1 and Q3, and we closed a lion's share in Q2 and Q4. But within those quarters, we even had, we would think about like, you have a build month, you have a gap month, and you have a close month. So if we were in a build quarter in a build month, there was a certain historical set of months that we would look at to compare performance. We do the same with quarters and things like that. So have as much of it as available to you as you can, because you never know, what you're going to get and what you might need.
Got it. Ryan, so how do you tackle this?
Yeah, I agree with everything Steve said. I think the other angle to that would be, like John Kellogg talks about this in a blog. Did sales have a chance to hit the number? Yes or no? And or did if we missed a number or made the number, was it because sales had a chance, like we had ramped butts and seats and we had a ton of pipeline, or did we have that and miss? And so I go back and look at really that at a team level. Did we enter the quarter with the appropriate coverage for us to hit the number? And if we did, then why didn't we hit it, or why did we beat it? And look for those outliers, and then look at it at an individual level and say, did that person come into the quarter with enough pipeline to hit the number, and talk to them about that. I obsess over pipeline. I'm sure Steve does as well, but in many ways, pipeline generation, if you can get really good at that, the team, the company will figure out how to give you the resources you need to win. But if you have to roll all sixes to hit your number, or for the team to hit the number, that's tough. And I think we've all been there for a quarter or two, but it's really hard to do time in and time out. There are certain KPIs that I think, at least I would look at and try not to look at it differently at the end of a quarter versus the start of a quarter, because you can almost create that artificial wave of everything closing at the end of the quarter. By the way, never in my career have I really broken the back of that. But really looking at the weekly and monthly KPIs on meetings and pipeline, on leads, I think that's evergreen. And recruiting as well. It's hard to do recruiting at the end of a quarter because you're pretty busy. So, but looking back, did we hit our talent goals to get people enabled and in place?
So that's actually, that's a little bit of a different dimension than what Steve mentioned. So if I kind of synthesize what I'm hearing, there's looking at the wins and cutting that a bunch of different ways to make sure you understand, like, how did you win, where did you win, right? There's looking at your pipeline, where is that coming from? Did I produce enough? How did did I cover the accounts that I intended to cover? What am I producing to set me up for the next quarter? Then there's the street quota. Do I have people in seats? Like, how many, who's ramping, who's not? Like, where am I on my headcount plan? And so, all of those things kind of integrate together into, a look back for where you're at. I think that one of the things that I'm really curious about with that is, how do you avoid, I don't know, spurious diagnosis, right? Like, it's easy to kind of like build up a narrative in your head. So because we're human, we find patterns, right? So when you look at that, how do you try to keep yourselves honest and say, like, is this really the story, or is there an alternative explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I think the danger is that you're looking for some kind of alibi or a biased confirmation on a good quarter, and that's really not what you want to do. I think you want to have a really good understanding of the inputs and the outputs, and a good explanation for how's this machine working. And then, the first principle, I think, is don't fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool. So relying heavily on my leaders to get their opinion, on my peers as well. What are they seeing? There's always challenges of being too, you want to be data driven, but not data dependent. Sometimes you're going to have incomplete or misleading data. So some of it's judgment, but you really have to anchor to looking for a really good explanation for how this thing works. And not get caught up in looking for excuses or alibis or biased confirmation for stuff that's working out.
Steve, how do you keep yourself honest?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm always focused on actually figuring out what's happening objectively. What's working, what's not working, what do we think was going to happen, what's actually happening. And the gold is in the variance between the two, right? So it's always trying to figure out, if things are going great, like, what's going on, like, what's happening, how can we double down on this, like, where did this come from, and what is, is it a certain group of people that are all of a sudden doing something new, like on the floor, and that's leading to bigger deals or higher deal velocity and things like that. What are they doing? How do we replicate that? How do we bring that to other teams and get it out of that little tribe that's having this outlierish success? Or it could be the opposite, where you're not doing as well as you had hoped, and then you just got to reverse engineer the whole thing. To Ryan's points, which I 100% agree with. Did we give ourselves a chance? Like, did we do the requisite amount of groundwork that we had to do in order to build the pipe, and did we get enough at bats? Most importantly, did we get enough at bats in the time that we would need to get them in by, so that deals could mature, so that they would reach closing at the right time. But yeah, so I also think that it's important to think about it with like, your left brain, right brain. Like there's leading your team and making sure that you're optimizing performance, whether you're behind or ahead. And there's a way to think about how you dig in to breaking up a quarter for that purpose, which is a little bit different from understanding it just as deeply to explain it to the board, share with them what you found and what you're doing to either double down on that success and or course correct it. So I don't think an alibi is needed when you understand exactly what's happened and what you're doing about it.
I would also just say I was fortunate to have two really good CFOs. One was fractional, but we really got like a healthy slice of the fraction at times, certainly around quarter close and preparing for board meetings, and an awesome revenue operations lead. And both of them, I think, can be a little bit more dispassionate about some of this stuff, a little bit more objective than maybe I can. So relying heavily on them to make sure that I'm not fooling myself.
So one other thing in this kind of analysis is, Steve, you mentioned right brain, left brain, right? So I think there is and Ryan, you mentioned part of it's like your instinct, like what you actually know. So how do you think about the objective, data analysis, the numbers show X versus some areas that are a little more subjective? For example, one of the things that I hear from a lot of people when they're wrapping up a quarter, they want to do a win-loss analysis, go look at their loss reasons, right? Really try to understand what all of those are. And I think if any of us have ever looked at a set of closed loss reasons that might have been left to us by reps, no matter what level of coaching about what they should include in there, always includes, it's a bit of a mess to figure out. So some of that ends up being kind of subjective. How do you think about that balance of maybe trying to aggregate some subjective assessments like that into a coherent story in addition to looking at the more quantitative data?
First thing I do is listen to my team. And, there are people who you can trust, right? Obviously, who are in these positions who tell you, their view of what they think is happening this quarter, why it's going good or what, or why not. And then you can start to look for those things in the data, right? I think that's one way that I think about starting it, right? Is like you kind of hear about these things and you start, it's kind of like an every single day you're operating and the feedback keeps bubbling up and you're like, okay. So it shouldn't be a big surprise. And then it's thinking about making sure that operationally you do have the right systems in place to be disciplined about collection of data because you're going to need it, right? And I like what Ryan said about not being data dependent. But if you left it to sales reps, myself included, like you wouldn't have data at all, right? So one of my mottos is that you have to make it easier for a sales rep to do something, or they won't do it at all, or you have to make everything turn red. So they can't advance, deals unless they fill in the appropriate information, and even then, it's an imperfect, methodology. But
Spot on.
yeah.
I'll tell you just a quick funny story. One of the things I like to do is go poach talent from direct competitors. And so I did recently. And in the conversations about, hey, here's where Zilla's having success. And, oh, you won that deal? That's still open in our pipeline. And, oh no, yeah, we did lose this other one. The loss reason was this other thing. And I'm like, oh, there are, I think, limits to anecdata that people are going to put in because they're supposed to. No one's ever going to say, look, we lost this deal because I got outsold, or I didn't build a champion or whatever. So in some ways, not even though I do, and I think everybody does, obsessing over an individual deal versus looking for patterns and trends where every time we encounter this competitor, this gets added to the scope of a POC. The word's out on us. So we got to figure out how to address that. Let's address it proactively. So yeah, I mean, I've said before, there's nothing about putting something into Salesforce that obligates the universe to get behind it, whether in terms of it will happen on this date. It's a cave painting, and it's a myth, and it's ideally our most accurate description of reality, but it's not reality. So that's where you don't want to be, I think, data dependent. But to Steve's point, and you said this earlier too, the more you can just instrument this, so it just gets picked up as things happen. I mean, tools like Gong enable some of this, and now some of the and other tools that do similar. We now live in a world where we're not dependent on the sales team coming in on Friday from a week of sales calls to take their notes out and start populating stuff into. I mean, we used PeopleSoft when I first started. It was a pain. So now that we can actually have note takers pulling data, that we can, have email data, we can have maybe at some point we'll have messaging data that can say, hey, here are all the activities that are happening. Here's the sentiment that was expressed. And you could see, well, here are the meetings that didn't happen. Like, we didn't have the meeting with that person, and that person is in Salesforce, and they're a relevant persona. We never got to them. Because the team is doing their best they can to hit their individual number, and just throwing more and more work on top of them to populate a CRM. Be careful what you ask for, because people will go put it in there, and it might not even be reality.
That is very, very true. I love the cave painting analogy, right? It kind of reminds me of, I don't know who said this, but the idea of like models and things in physics, right? Which is that all models are inaccurate, some are useful, right? And that's kind of the idea of CRM, right? It's all inaccurate, some of it's useful. So, well, look, let's shift gears a little bit to talk about, okay, we've done these look backs, right? We've looked at our wins, we've looked at our stage progression, we've looked at differences across reps, we've looked at differences across personas, across different segments. We've started to form our narrative of what we learned. So how do we think about translating that into a set of actions to take in the next quarter? And particularly, I think this is the time to maybe just zero in a little bit on like that Q1 to Q2 transition. Q1 is kind of a weird quarter, right? It's when you kick off things. It's when you have your big plans, you have your, RKO, and you declare all these things, right? But that's distracting, and the reps don't have as much time to actually be, doing the work. And so then, you get hit in the face with a little dose of reality at the end of March, the end of April, on like whether that's working or not. So I'm curious, Steve, I'll just start with you. As you're thinking about specifically that transition from Q1 to Q2, how do you think about starting to maybe adjust that plan that you just rolled out, and think about what's next in the coming quarter?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the number one thing that you can do is communicate well, right? Communicate to your team, communicate to the CEO, communicate to the board. And I think about those as three different conversations that are leveraging the same data. Okay, it should be transparent to your team, like what's happening. Are you on plan? Are you off plan? If you are, share all those insights that we were talking about earlier. And then, what is working and for whom on the team? What are we seeing that's good or promising? And then aligning, it's almost like education. Awareness comes first, and then it's education, and then, get tactical with your frontline team. And I think that you should do that directly as a CRO. I think you should educate your leaders. Their roles are really like the day-to-day, instilling that those stage-to-stage behaviors, like the real training to help influence those behaviors. That's really on them, but help them also see what you're seeing from the big picture. But let everybody in the organization know what you're seeing and why you're going to do certain things and how you're going to fix those things, right? I think this is mostly relevant when things aren't working well. It's still relevant when things are
Been
working.
easy the last few years, Steve. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And I think, to your point, Hayes, right? Like, you come into the year and everybody's energized and everybody's excited. And Q1 typically is a tough one, right? It's what I've always experienced is like one of those build quarters. So I think that I think what you can do, and I think what my focus has always been, is on trying to keep the momentum going and keep the energy high. And more than anything, give your team confidence that whatever hasn't been working or is a little bit off from expectations, they have confidence in the data. It's sound. It makes logical sense. You've communicated it, and they also believe in the logic and the common sense to the tactics and strategies that you're asking them to do. And then the last thing for a team for me is how we're going to measure it as well, because teams will focus heavily on the things that you're going to be measuring at an executive level, and making sure that you're pushing that down through your second, third line, first line managers. Everybody understands that, hey, we have to focus on this, specifically if you're talking about stage to stage stuff. If that's what led you astray and you're trying to get back on track, get everybody rallied around that from the front lines on up. And that's where I think you start to see the magic happen. And then communicating what you're doing at that level with the board, I think is crucial. If it makes sense, if it's educational, and if it's based in the data, and people believe, right? I think that's the most important thing, is keeping the belief that, hey, we know what we're talking about. We have two hands on the steering wheel, and this is going to be a good next quarter, because if we do these things, it is going to work out, right? I think that's how I think about the transition from Q1 to Q2.
Oh, Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you're not in a position where you're changing a strategy quarter over quarter, because that can be really jarring to the team. And to the board, right? When there's a whole new strategy, or, we're going to pivot to mid-market, right? Where did that come from? So that said, when you've rolled out the plan for the year and the strategy, and maybe you're trying some new things, definitely have gates of we're going to know this is working or not, and we're going to cut bait if, we don't clear this gate. We're going to have to do something different. It's when you're in that tweener area where you're well, we're having some progress, but not the progress we expected, that it gets really hard. And then tactically, I think you can make changes to the tactics and the mechanics of how the team's operating, but only so many. It just can't be this list of 12 things that we have to do differently in Q2 to hit the numbers. Let the data guide you to what the highest leverage areas to improve are. The highest leverage and the smallest number of things that we can do to have the biggest impact. It could be a change to the way we're going to do the POV. We're going to try to make sure, and we did, POVs in our sales process. How do we get that to be less than 30 days, right? And so you can make some changes around that to make sure that you're moving quickly and effectively through that stage. But if you're trying to make, I don't know, a dozen different changes, people are going to get whiplash. They're going to have a hard time adopting all of that. So in addition to what Steve said, that's what I would add.
So you all have been through a bunch of these transitions, a bunch of, quarter-over-quarter transitions, and done this exercise a whole lot. I imagine there's some pretty common patterns you have in your head for, if I see X, I should do Y, right? I'm curious if there's, Ryan, just with you, I'm curious if there are some patterns that you've applied successfully to say, yeah, this is usually the highest leverage thing. I can see 5 different things it could be, but often it's X. All right. So I'm kind of curious about that. I know it can be hard to answer that question, but I think a lot of times there are certain go-tos. And so I'm curious if you have any of those that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, the perennial challenge for me, at least, has been pipeline. So, and folks trying to take whatever pipeline they have and turn it into the number they need to hit. And a lot of effort gets spent in that. That if we actually just spent less, deals are like gas. They'll grow to fill any space you give them. And if you got 3, you're going to spend all your time on 3 deals. And if you got 10, you're going to spend all your time on 10. So really making sure that people have enough qualified opportunity to go and hit the number has been, I think, the biggest one. It's always the first area I look. And I think the last few years in particular, that's just been a challenge for a lot of teams. Um, and then often I've seen that when we deviate from a process we have, so we had one at Zilla. There's exit and entry criteria into each stage, and for us, one of the stages was an economic buyer meeting. We were using Medic, and we would have some opportunities where that we weren't able to get that meeting, and we would win some of them. But every deal we lost, we found that we deviated somewhere from the process, and so using that to come back to the team and say, if ultimately we were going to deviate from the process and we weren't going to win, they didn't want to engage the way we wanted to engage, wouldn't it have been really good to know that 45 days in and then move on? And so it's really hard to do, especially even maybe harder when you're not in like a pipeline rich environment, to say, well, I'm going to walk away from this one because they don't want to engage, the way we want to engage. But then really showing them that data where like you should really fight for that meeting and help them understand why we think that's good for them as well. Put a little bit of extra effort in, go a little harder before backing down, because look what the data showed, right? All of these ones that we're not really happy with the outcome, we made a bunch of exceptions and they added up to, a pile of not great deals. So those are, I think, the two most common that emerge.
Yeah, I've got one. I think it's and that was great, Ryan. When I lock in with like my leadership team, we're trying to troubleshoot the individuals, right? Like, what is going on here? This person made President's Club last year. We're coming into Q1. It's like way low on all the activity and like what's happening, right? Or if somebody, puts a meeting on my calendar and they're like, hey, I'd love to talk to you. Like, I'm in a huge funk. Like, help me get out of this. I would say like 90% of the time, it has something to do with getting back to the basics, right? Whether it's getting back to your process and your methodology, as Ryan was pointing out, or for me, most of the time, what I have seen is that people are just operating with super stale lists. So if you're a mid-market and you need to like do a lot of full cycle sales, you need to be prospecting and going after a bunch of accounts, or if you're an enterprise rep and you have a set of named accounts, but in either scenario, it's like you just haven't been updating the list. You've been going after the same person or the same company, right? And you're not like making it fresh. You always see, their connect rates or reply rates and pipeline creation, everything just goes off a cliff. So that's one big theme that I always encourage folks to look at, is go back to baseline on when was the last time they had a great, account strategy session if they're in the enterprise and thinking about different geos or different angles that they could go in at, or if you're in the mid-market, when was the last time they actually did like a full house cleanup and went through and just and typically that once you go through that, people are energized coming out like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. It's like, yeah, like you've been slamming your head against the wall for 3 months. That probably wasn't fun. So that's one. And then another thing that comes up for me is just like management style. I typically find personally to be most effective that when things are going great, uh, uh, it's like that's when you really tighten the grip to make sure that everybody doesn't get fat and happy or a little bit cocky. It's a long year, right? And there's a lot of discipline work that still needs to be done. But also, if things are going a little bit wrong, right? Nobody's feeling that more than your team, and that's the time to really loosen up a bit and wrap your arms around them. And I think that. That's how you don't lose them, right? They're already probably pissed off enough. And if you come to them with help and you can make an impact and help them get back on track, that's where I think you can really get, a team's morale and focus back. And I think that at every quarter, I'm always kind of thinking about that, right? Are we like, what kind of leader are we in need of right now? And trying to embody that and remind other folks that are in charge of people leadership to do the same.
So speaking of people, one of the things that I, you know, one of the reasons I, as a former engineer, have been drawn to sales is it's this fascinating machine, if you will, Ryan. You compared it to a machine earlier, but it's populated with people, and people do all sorts of interesting things, right? They get into funks, they have challenges, they sometimes they go on a run, and it's great, like all of those things happen. But when you identify that, hey, there's something we need to adjust, like Ryan, your economic buyer meeting, right? Like, so taking that as an example, and one of the things that I think is always interesting is you need to adjust behavior a lot of times at scale to get what you want, right? And that's not always easy. And so I'm curious if there's, for each of you, like one concrete way that you've actually implemented something, said, hey, we need to change X. Here's the way we're going to make sure that we get adoption of that change in behavior. Like, I'd be curious if how you've managed to like roll out something that really incented that, or really got the kind of compliance and adjustment that you were looking for. So, would love to hear maybe a concrete approach to that, because most of us are trying to adjust, the behavior of 50 people, and it's hard to do.
I think this is a good one for Steve because he's managed bigger teams more recently than I have. I was able to count all of the tires in the employee parking lot of the team, right? It was a seed and then Series A team. So for my example, early stage, you can have a lot of one-on-ones and personally do the, hey, this is why it's important, and this is how I think it's going to make you more effective. This is why we're doing it. And you don't have to worry about it scale. So I've maybe had it a little bit easier than you did, Steve, in the later years. So I'm interested in what you would say to that.
Yeah.
Well, I think to one of your points earlier, Ryan, it's like you don't want to make big changes, right? And I think the lens that I've looked through most of these questions in is subtle improvements, it's optimizations, it's tweaking things. But what about the times where you do have to make a big change, right? What if there's a reduction in force and you have to reorganize and recalibrate the engine to you know do as much as you were planning to do with far fewer moving parts within, right? And that calls for some disruption. Or it could be other unforeseen things like COVID and stuff. All of a sudden, you get that breaking ball, and it's like you're in office 5 days a week, and then you're at home. So what do you do, right? And then you make changes, and how do you make them stick? I think I've already shared how I think about it, and it's communication number one. It's putting common sense plans forward as to like, where are we going? How are we going to do it? And why should you believe in it with data? It's explaining like what got us into this position, and taking the time to like slow it down and educate your team, educate your account executives, your managers, bring everybody together and be willing to be vulnerable, so that folks and transparent. And this is a thing that I think a lot of leaders need to do a better job on, is like actually sharing with people what's happening and why it's happening, and taking questions, and encouraging an environment and multiple avenues for folks to engage with you on those things, right? So I would do team trainings with a group of 20 people and be an hour, and there'd be like one team, and we would just go open office hours, any question you wanted to ask, and within a reason, we would answer those types of things. And this is like critical to moments of change, and it's like get a culture where it's people are comfortable with saying, that idea stinks. And it's like, well, why does that idea stink? And they're like, well, here's why. Bang, bang, bang. And you listen, right? And maybe like they're right, and maybe your approach is a little bit imperfect. And I think that builds trust. Over time, trust is going to be the most important ally to you in trying to get something new to stick. And then it's back to what I said earlier, which is what you measure is oftentimes what you get. And people say that, it's a cliche how often people say it. It's surprising how few people do it, right? And it keeps you honest on whether or not your thing that you're trying to change is actually changeable to the extent that you hope to change it. Um, and so concrete example would be back to the stage to stage focus. We had a pipeline issue. And when we looked at the stage to stage analysis, what used to be like a 35%, 40% demo to close one conversion or win rate was now down in like the mid teens, 15, 16%, something like that. So we had to do, a full engine overhaul to understand why. And then this is one of those moments where we had to make some big changes. We had to decrease the overall team size, and we had to look deeply and critically at what was working and not working. Long story short, we needed more demos, and there was a population of people on our team that were getting those demos at that level. So we looked in and we looked at what they were doing and who they were targeting, and we made it a full team focus. What are our current stage to stage metrics? What do they need to be? Not just at a percentage level, but a quantity level, not for the year, for like the next, quarter, but for like the next week, for the next month, for the next, 2 months, 3 months. And we would just meet all the time and track all the time on like how we're improving and how we're doing. And then at the end of each month, we would take a look together and say, wow, like it might only seem like 2%, right? We've only gone from here to there, but it's going to make a big difference. And when we were able to change using that method of communication, transparency, and measurement, every stage to stage metric to get closer to where we wanted to be. So that's one example.
So I wanna shift a little bit more. As you're saying that, Steve, the quarters are inherently a little bit artificial, right? Like we kind of like there's nothing special about the quarter. It's just like a reasonably good time to get the board together and like make sure
Yeah.
that things are on track, right? Like we treat it like it's this immutable thing, but it's just something we've kind of decided on. But it does become important because you're talking to the board, you're usually kind of reporting your metrics there to have that conversation. And one of the things that happens is we've been talking a lot about this look back and thinking about the adjustments you make as, these are things that you're fully in control of alongside your team, right? But let's be honest, some of those close loss reasons are the product isn't competitive in some facet, right? Or there's we don't have the inbound pipeline we had this quarter versus last quarter. So there are other stakeholders who are involved. So when the data leads you to a place where it looks like there's a challenge that you don't fully own, how do you communicate that? And how do you try to adjust for that with your peers? Ryan, you wanna take that one?
Yeah, I think the sales is a team sport in the sense that it's the whole company. It's the output of what everyone in the company has been working on. And I think it's the job of the CRO to really help guide the whole organization on what needs to be done in order to affect that outcome. And that's why it's a really hard job, because there are a lot of dependencies. I think I've made the mistake in the past of years and years ago of thinking that I was as the head of sales, the duly elected representative at the council of leadership to advocate exclusively for the sales team. And I think I put some peers through some difficult times when I was taking that approach. And I did get guidance from executives that have been doing this a long time about how to look at that differently. And so I've matured in that area. I think it's probably common for a lot of first time revenue leaders to do that. these are your partners in success. They really have to want your team to succeed, and no one should be falling on a sword in any department. This is our product. This is our engineering team. This is our sales team. We want everyone to be successful. So building really strong relationships with peers, finding that balance of not just showing up asking for something, offering to help or some suggestions, but also not steering the car in their lane and kind of telling them how to do their job. It's a really delicate balance, because I don't think anyone likes it when someone who's not been a sales leader or revenue leader is saying, you should be doing this. So it's sort of the dark art, I think, of building a strong relationship with peers on the leadership team, trying to be as blameless as you can, recognizing that you could still be blamed for it, even if that's the case. Just own it, and ask for help from the rest of the team. I've been fortunate to work with some really good teams, and I've learned a lot about myself in that process too. But I don't know that I have a silver bullet there. What I do think is important is to not let the team get into a finger pointing exercise with other departments, to not be leading that kind of charge. It's not productive. It really needs to be about what do we all collectively need to do to go change the future. Again, approaching it from a, things aren't going the way we want them to go perspective. I don't know, Steve.
Yeah, this is one of the hardest things about the position, I think. The reality of the situation is, as we know, things in product and across companies don't change quickly. Like it's even if you have reps that are 100% positive, if we had this feature, we would start to win against this competitor more. Right? It's like, okay, great. So we have a roadmap, and then even if we got this in, you're not going to be seeing it till whenever. So you might be right, but at the same time, we have to focus on the things that we can control. So I think I and this is so challenging because again, I think it comes back to education for the reps who are quick to point the fingers, but at the same time, there's a whole bunch of validity and authentic feedback coming from wherever that source of pain is. And back to the CRM being accurate, I would always encourage folks that if you want to make sure that people understand how important this is, that you're tracking it actively, and if you keep losing to this competitor, like make sure that you're tracking the reasons why we're losing to that competitor, because that is like the objective way to communicate with product teams, right? I'll take the qualitative back, but if we don't have the objective data to support it, it becomes harder to make that case. And I think that like board meetings are tricky things. There's like on one extreme, it's like, here's all the things that are wrong with our company, and here's how we're going to fix them. On the opposite extreme, it's like you can't talk about anything that's bad. It's just like a big rah-rah coordinated coaching session, like where everybody's like, okay, here's your role, and like selling everybody as to why things are great, right? And I've seen both. And I think that the best way to do it, to Ryan's point, is to like really lock arms with your peers and functional leaders across the organization, and do both. Talk about all the things that are great that everybody in the organization is doing, right? And also make sure that you have your data in order to be able to present, where some of those opportunities for improvement are, and you can do that without throwing, each other under the bus. So yeah, and I would also say if you're going to do that in a board meeting, you make sure that everybody's aware of it ahead of time, so that it's not surprising anybody or throwing anybody off. Right? It's if you align your message with somebody, you can show the close loss data, you can show the things that are tied to product enhancements or competitive losses, and you can do it in a way that doesn't piss off your head of product, right?
Yeah.
Or alarm everybody.
Yeah, and like, what are we going to do about it, right?
Yeah,
Like, maybe we're going to not try to sell the companies that we think are going to need that for a while until we have it, and we've got a plan, and we're going to move forward. I had a private equity board that was very different than a VC board, but both very, very good boards. But the private equity folks, really, they wanted to like tune up the go to market leaders, so they didn't really dig a whole lot into product. And we showed them everything, every which way, right? Let's see that over a month-over-month trailing 12-month view, right? And it was a ton of data. And I think with the venture board, it was more distilling things down into the right set of data for them to really understand what's going on in the business, but not necessarily slides and slides and slides of all of these different breakouts. And then with the private equity board, I would come in and say, here are the things that are not working. And we were very explicit. But this last time around, particularly putting things on the slides in writing, it was more, hey, save that for the conversation because this stuff's going to be in due diligence. And, I appreciate that you want to be transparent about what's not working. Maybe, so my key wins and losses slide became key wins and learnings, right? And we didn't use the color red to, call out the losses. So that was a bit of an adjustment, because these things do get memorialized. But in a private equity context, we weren't raising in another 8 months. And so we could come in and say, look, here's the bedhead and we're going to, here's the plan to fix it. So that was, I don't know, just some differences in how you communicate depending on what your investors are looking for.
Well, so let's wrap up with a quick lightning round here. I'm going to put you guys completely on the spot, but we're talking about these artificial quarters that end, and then we go and get up in front of the board and talk about what did we learn, what do we do differently, what are our learnings, not our losses necessarily, right? So what would the one piece of advice you would give another CRO? Like, what's your one piece of advice to them to make a board meeting successful for them, whether it was a good quarter or a bad quarter? Ryan, you're on the spot.
Yeah, I think the more everything hangs together logically, particularly across all the functional areas that'll be presenting, so that you're not reading chapters of a different book or presenting that to the board, right? They don't live in the business in the way that we do. So how do you explain all of that? And I think having a deep understanding of not just the metrics, but why those metrics are emergent. Like we were talking about POV win rates. I've been in scenarios where we have very high POV win rate and it's like, oh, well, we just got to go push everything into POV. And it's like, well, no, because like we really qualify these things before, and that's why we have the high win rate. And so, what you'll do is, shovel a lot of crap into POV, and then your POV win rates go down. And on top of that, it's more work because there's more POV. So not just having excellent command of the metrics. And I love listening to Steve like talk about 6 quarters ago. It's like the whole LeBron calling out a play from like 10 years ago kind of thing. Deep command of the metrics, but also a really good understanding of why that is the case, so that when we start talking about changes we can make to improve things, that we don't make an improvement here and then kind of trade off over there. So those would be the 2 pieces of advice I would say.
All right, Steve, I think you got called the LeBron of.
I feel bad. He's wearing the Celtics, and I'm a huge Celtics fan. I just
might be insulting. I don't know. Shouldn't be. I don't think.
Well, I'll go with the Celtics reference then. I would say that you have to know the truth. That's a Paul Pierce reference. Yeah. So I totally agree in that departmental alignment. Do a dry run with your functional peers. Make sure that they know what's going on, and make sure that you're aligned with their story and everybody, because that just delivers a cohesive experience. I think that's a great call out on Ryan's part. I'd say do a big workout the morning of a board meeting. Like really, you want to come in on the back foot, not the front foot. You want to be like relaxed, not in an aggressive posture. Trust me, that's hard for me at times. And I've learned that coming in with the right energy and the right mindset can make all the difference. So you're going to be asked a lot of questions. You're not always going to have all the answers, even though you're trying to be the Paul Pierce ready with the truth. When you don't know something, that's okay. Just take a deep breath and acknowledge that it's a great question, that you'll run it down for somebody, and just leave it at that. Oftentimes that's perceived, at a much better level than try to come up with some answer on the spot where you're not, as tight as you're going to be with a whole bunch of other questions that they're going to have. You're going to be super tight because you did the work to understand things ahead of time. So when you get that curveball, just don't fight back too much. And then also the last thing is, like, people are going to poke at you. Every board meeting, they're just going to test you. They're going to throw something at you. At least that's been my experience, and not just speaking from my own perception, but I've seen it go at the CEO, at the CMO, at the CTO, head of product. It's like, oh my gosh, that's a crazy question. It's like, I think half the time it's just about how you're going to respond to it. And the only time I've gotten bad marks on a board meeting, it's where I pushed back a little bit too hard on areas where I knew I was right. But like, it wasn't the point of being right. The board member was trying to ask an insightful question about the business to understand, and I kind of took it as almost like they were trying to dunk on me or something like that, or dunk on my teammate, to keep the basketball reference going. And I was defensive in a few of those scenarios and got coached up on it. But those are a few of the tricks. Know your stuff, make sure you've worked out, be aligned with your team, and don't be defensive.
Yeah, definitely.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you both for the time. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing this, and hope everybody who's listening is wrapping up a good Q1 and moving on to Q2, and shows up at the board meeting ready to go. So thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Give 'em
Thanks,
out.
Ace. Good luck, everyone.